Okay, guys, so the last lecture covered more intellectual and cultural movements, artistic movements coming out of World War One. The Age of Anxiety also is called that because of the political and economic struggles and crises that are happening. Um, Europe has changed very much. We said this, right? People's lives are changed, but even countries themselves look very different. Okay, so this is going to be focusing on the political and socioeconomic situations for the next 20 or so years leading into World War II. Um, a few things that I did not add in the last lecture that I want to kind of emphasize are a few things. One is the Bauhaus movement. This is architecture. You guys probably remember this from world history. Bauhaus movement is pursuing not so much things that are grandiose and good looking, but things that are functional. They have a form factor to it. There's a reason why it's built that way. And the purpose of it is that, if things are going to be destroyed, we shouldn't build things because they're going to look good, because eventually, what's the purpose of it, right? So they questioned a lot of that, and so the Bauhaus movement is going to be kind of what we call modernism or modernist type of architecture, and that's what's going to catch on more international later into the 1920s, the 1930s, and then we have the Flapper Girls. Okay, the Flapper Girls, as you can see there in the bottom left-hand corner. These girls are representing that women in society are going to have lower restrictions in terms of like what is like socially appropriate. Pleasure-seeking behavior that was once unimaginable, not approved by the status quo, drinking, racy dancing, and looser sexual morality reflected a lot of growth and development in the urban lifestyle. So if you live in the city, it's more likely that you've seen these things. I mean, imagine what they think of our society today, right? Okay, so women are going to dress less modestly and also be unescorted in public. There's this fly that's like all over me. Anyways, so because of the depression that's going on, right? Because of the disillusionment that's going on, and people are looking to seek and escape their emotions through gratifying behaviors, and war in effect would change the social patterns of traditional roles between men and women. Sometimes men will lose their jobs, and we're going to talk about this. And they were once the breadwinners of the family, and that's going to change. Okay, so nihilism. We actually talked a little bit about this before, but I think at this point, how it's in context is that there's existential nihilism, where existentialists are working in the way that there is no objective meaning or purpose in life, and it's adding on to existentialism. Before, it was more about how science had to give things a purpose and construct, but yeah, this is in the framework of existentialism. All right, so two things we're going to be covering is mainly the political struggles and the economic crises. The first thing is that after World War One, the political outlook of Europe has looked very different. Well, one, the Soviet Union, right, is now an official country, and so it's going to produce the Red Scare, where people are scared of having their own governments turn to communism, and Bolshevism would kind of rule Europe. And so there are some communist revolutionaries that are going around Europe trying to, see the same type of change themselves. And because the governments have fallen apart or they have started anew in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, yeah, it's pretty up for grabs for who will have the most influence politically. The Weimar Republic is going to be the new government system in Germany after World War One, and the Social Democratic Party is the main political party. They talked about the largest one, and at the time where Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to abdicate the throne as the largest political party, over time they're just going to proclaim that now Germany is a republic. Okay, so remember, Germany unified under Bismarck and Wilhelm, and then after Wilhelm I died, now we have Wilhelm II, it's always still been under kind of a monarchy. constitutional monarchy. But now it's just a republic, and they have a president, and they'll get there. Okay, so the Social Democratic Party is kind of the main party. I have this political spectrum down below, and it's really important for us to kind of understand the left and the right. So the SPD, Social Democratic Party, would be kind of in between a left, center left, or liberal moderate group, right? And you have the Catholic Center Party. They're more on the conservative side, but not extremely conservative, not really reactionary, I would say. Okay, and the problem right now is that the Weimar Republic, as it's a new government, it's going to have a lot of trouble to establish political loyalty of its people, because they once were loyal, right, to Germany, which is under the emperor, but now under the Kaiser, but now there is no Kaiser, right? So who are they loyal to? And so this is kind of like the issue. All right, and of course the communists are going to be on the way left. All right, so essentially, like I said before, Germany is a baby to democracy. They're a baby to a country, right? They've been around for maybe 50 or so years, but even more so as a democracy, they're learning and they're not good at it. Remember the time when France was going through its time where they wanted to be a constitutional monarchy, and then they wanted to be a republic, and then during their first republic, it was the Reign of Terror, right? And it was the Committee of Public Safety ruling. The directory was all messed up. It was a bad first republic, right? So Germany being its first republic, they too are going to suffer these struggles, right? So first they're going to get some threats from the left side, and so this is where we're going to see that because Germany has a lack of experience in being democratic, right, many conservative military groups need to come and to protect it from these communist outbreaks. One group is called the Freikorps. They are conservatives. They are giving military support, and essentially the Weimar government is kind of like under the influence of the Freikorps, because they're the ones who are supporting the government. Okay, so they are very right-wing, right, and they're kind of like guarding the government. Then you have the Spartacists. Spartacists were communists, okay, so they're on the other side, they're on the left side, and they actually took control of Berlin, the capital, for a week, and but after that week, the Freikorps were able to crush the communist uprising and killing the leaders. Okay, so what's important to know is that in a republic, that it's a multi-party system. Before this, okay, the multi-party system wasn't that strong because you still had the Kaiser, but now it's a republic, so it's, kind of up to just electoral representatives, right? So then there's going to be elections that are going to be happening in the government, and the SPD is going to hold the most seats, but it's slowly going to be sharing more seats with other political parties as well, and eventually the whole capital itself will be moved over to Weimar, because they wanted to kind of move away from their heritage of having Prussian imperial traditions in Berlin. So Berlin was once the capital, but they moved to Weimar, and eventually that will change again. Okay, all right. So we talked about the end of World War I. The huge factor in their loss is the decision of the Treaty of Versailles. So the main theme for this slide, and even the 1930s, is sad times for Germany, ultimate bitterness, resentment, extremely harsh, unjust, all that stuff. They hate France, right? They feel bitter towards the Western powers because of this. Treaty of Versailles took away, right? Took away Alsace-Lorraine, took away territory to give to Poland. Their military is now, demoralized and diminished. War reparations, war guilt clause. Oh my gosh, right? No one in Germany is like, it is what it is, right? Everyone in Germany is pissed off. Okay, and then we have the Polish corridor. So in addition to giving up land, Germany's actually split a little bit because Poland needs to have access to the Baltic Sea. So here you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, right? That's a Polish corridor, and they now have access to the sea. And then we have the Saar region. The Saar region is where, if you look in the red map, right, it's the border of France and Germany, where French troops are going to occupy this area to ensure that, that German aggression is not going to rise up, right? They're doing it more of a defense reason, but the main part of why this is so important is because this land is a huge economic opportunity. The Saar region was rich in coal and iron mines, and later we will get to the Ruhr Crisis, where much of the steel and iron production will take place in this area. Now France is control of that. Germany's not going to be too happy. Okay. France is always looking to, look out for its own security, and that's why they're so aggressive towards Germany. The British actually felt that they didn't have to be as harsh to punish Germany because they realized that Germany's economy was very close to their own economy, and so if they punish them, it might hurt them in return. Remember we talked about like John Maynard Keynes, who came up with this kind of economic prediction that the economies of the world are very international, interlinked. Okay. All right. So the Weimar government has moved now. Okay. They, like I said, are struggling to gain political loyalty from its people, and by signing the Versailles Treaty. This is probably something that they didn't really have a choice to, but because they did so, many of the conservatives in Germany felt that, hey, you know what? This is like a stab in the back. That's what diktat means. Okay, it means the dictated peace, and it was, kind of like forced upon them, and they felt like that was not right, and so the bitterness and resentment is going to grow much more. All right. Okay, so how else is it still unstable? We talked about during the French Revolution, unstable. New Constitution is written, 1919. Okay, so this is not even the 1920s yet, and we have the new Constitution that's written. Basically, you have the Reichsstaat and the Reichstag. This is where you have the upper Reichsstaat and lower Reichstag. The main difference is now, as opposed to under Bismarck, is that the lower house, the Reichstag, is going to be elected by universal suffrage, and they will have a chancellor as well, and there's a president. Okay, so the president's that's going to be elected, and also female suffrage is going to be available in Germany. Okay, so reforms are happening, but it's still not stable because they have just really begun, right? So every constitution, its purpose is to really give structure to its government, and here they go. Now, we talked about there's threats from the left, right? We talked about how the communists were uprising, and then the Free Corps were able to stop them. Then we have threats from the right, and so now the right's upset, and so this is what makes it unstable. This is what's the struggle. It's a tug of war going back and forth. Now the right is upset, and then you have the Kapp-Push, which is kind of like a rebellion, overthrow, and so conservative politicians and businessmen are trying to take control of Berlin, and they actually declared a new government. So the right side is upset. They don't like what's going on, right? And so eventually what's going to happen is that there's going to be a general strike. Things are going to come to a halt, and so the economy in Germany is going to be affected. In the end, okay, this overthrow was unsuccessful, and even though the conservatives could not completely control the Reichstag, they were able to gain more seats. So as the outcome, the SPD eventually is not strong enough to stay in power, and eventually they're not going to be part of it. And so now the Weimar Republic is going to be focused to be more of a center, moderate, right type of political party and dominance. Okay. All right. So main thing. Germany is a baby at democracy. It's learning. It's struggling to walk. Okay, economically, this is a huge part too. Okay, they go hand in hand. The economic crisis is really stemming from Germany because Kaiser Wilhelm did not want to raise taxes during World War I. He thought that it would cause people to feel like they had to, pay for the war, and to kind of take them away from knowing that the government's fighting for them. The Weimar Republic also wanted to gain favor of its people, right? They wanted to try to build political loyalty, and so they didn't tax them again. And so the issue of war reparations is going to be a huge issue because they don't have the money to pay it off, right? So the U.S. is going to play a big part in this. The U.S. is going to loan money to Germany, and so this is where you have the arrow from the U.S. going to Germany, and invest in funds to rebuild the German economy. Also, Germany is going to take the money of these loans from the U.S., okay, and they're going to use that money to pay back Great Britain and France for the war reparations. And the thing is, Great Britain and France actually owe the United States money because the United States loaned them money during the war. So as you kind of see, with the U.S. loans to Germany, it's getting paid back to them through Great Britain and France, and also Germany's going to be paying back their own loans to the United States as well. Over time, we're going to see that the U.S. is going to have less and less investors. They're going to have these investments be pulled out, and this whole repayment structure that you see right now is going to collapse. And so these are the kind of the causes of why there was an economic crisis. And through the 1920s, there's actually times where the economy is going to come up and boom a little bit, but it's going to bust and fall apart. So economically, it's unstable as well. So we can kind of bank on that. That's what's happening the whole time. All right, so the Ruhr Crisis that I mentioned earlier is in this little red region where France is going to occupy this region, okay, and 80% of Germany's steel and coal is produced in this area. The Weimar government ordered the Ruhr residents to stop working and kind of basically passively resist and go on strike over French rule, right? And so that's going to be a problem too, because now they stop working and stop production. This is a huge part of how they can pay things back. So what's going to happen there, right? They don't want to pay France back by striking to work, but the debts are still there. Okay. Another issue is the hyperinflation. Okay, if you remember, inflation is where the value of currency or money goes down. Hyperinflation is exponentially more times that. Okay, for example, in 1919, the exchange rate was $1 equals 9 marks. 4 years later, 1923, $1, 4.2 trillion marks. And so it's ridiculous of how worthless their money is, and it's because Germany just starts printing money. What does that do? It means that every single German mark is now worth less, and so just because you pay it out in numbers does not mean that it's worth anything. So what's going to happen? There's going to be kind of this like social upset and revolution in Germany where many retired and middle class people are like, dude, you just screwed our lives over. All of our savings are now worth nothing that we put in the bank. Middle class is going to resent them because they have worked hard for their money, and they blame the Western government, they blame big businesses, and eventually they're going to blame a lot of minorities like communists and Jews, which sounds a lot like what Hitler's going to target. Okay, all right, so I have to add this in because it's part of this time, and it's basically to intro this guy named Adolf Hitler. And the Nazi Party basically wanted to have their own overthrow, coup d'etat, and it's called a beer hall push because it was in a beer hall. And anyways, there's a lot of beer halls in Germany because that's what they drink there. He was only in jail. It was unsuccessful. He was only in jail for about a year, and it just shows that because he was only in jail for a year for trying to overthrow the government, is because a lot of the judges were very conservative and agreed to his views, the Nazis' views of being anti-Republican. Okay, so that's kind of our first little peek of Hitler trying to take over the country. He's unsuccessful though, and later he's going to find a new way to do so. All right, then we have the Dawes Plan. So because of the economic crises, what's going to happen is that the League of Nations, along with the United States, is going to, a banker, right, is going to come up with a new plan to restructure Germany's debt, where they're going to lower war reparations and have kind of a payment plan to figure it out how they can pay back. Later on, there's also called a Young Plan, which is a continuation of the Dawes Plan. But by then, kind of the Great Depression is going to come, and then it's going to be like worthless. So here you have a picture of like a guy going to buy his groceries with the wheelbarrow. Then you have some kids playing with stacks and stacks and stacks of money, and they're like Legos, right? They're just playing with them and playing in the street because it's not worth anything, right? And so you've seen pictures where women are burning their money in their fireplace because it's more worth to them as firewood, fire paper, than it is to actually buy wood itself. All right, so after the war, okay, Treaty of Versailles is signed. Not very good. Everyone hates it. But then you have a couple of things that kind of improve Germany's standing in the world. Okay, then you have the Locarno Pact, and this is in 1925. This is where European nations are going to agree to settle all disagreements peacefully. Okay, peace, not war. And so that's going to be signed and agreed. You have little political cartoons that step by step, Dawes Plan, Locarno Pact, right? Baby steps now. And then you have the League of Nations, where Germany is going to join in 1926. Before they weren't allowed in, now they are. And so Germany is going to work out their borders, and they're going to okay that, but they're going to pull out. right before World War II, and you have the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is actually something that is very important. All these three things, these three events are really important, but this is where war was announced as illegal except for self-defense. 62 nations agreed to this, so it sounds like great. The purpose of the League of Nations was to keep international peace. We've signed this document, but there was no real enforcement. It was just kind of like all some nice words to say. Okay, what's going on in the other countries? A few things we need to say is that France, they are going to have economic problems just like similar to Germany because of their suffering in death and debts. They lost 1.5 million people, and those are people who could have worked for their country, right? And so now they have less workers in the area. Also, they have a devastating $23 billion in damages. I don't know if you've used an inflation calculator, but the 32, 33, 34 billion dollars that Germany owed in war reparations equals about $4.2 trillion today. So that's a huge, fat bill that is put upon Germany. They cannot afford it at that time. No country can afford it today, even still. So that's how much damage went on in France, and so all of this debt would create economic chaos and political unrest in France as well, but not as much compared to Great Britain and Germany, of course. Trade and production is going to be affected in France, but Great Britain, which is more importantly, we're going to go, okay? So during war, we talked about how there's going to be more social equality and social harmony, the blurring of class lines. Women over 21 in 1928 are going to gain the right to vote, right, after 1918, universal male suffrage. Okay, a few things, though. The main part that Britain's going to suffer is through unemployment, and that's about 12%. The United States right now, I think, is about 10%, 11%, which is pretty bad. Okay, so unemployment is really bad because that means that people don't have jobs. They don't have jobs, they don't have money. They don't have money, they can't buy things, which hurts your economy. So they're not going to really recover from the economic losses suffered in World War I, and it's going to take some time. What happens in 1926, there's going to be a general strike. And so you kind of see in pretty much every country there's going to be strikes because people are looking for higher wages, but the businesses can't afford that, so it's kind of hard, and they're all tied together. So what happens is that miners were striking because they felt like there was a drop in there's a pay cut in their wages. Eventually, all other unions are going to strike as well. Okay, and so they are having this kind of sympathetic labor strike, and so this is where it's called the general strike because of it. Social welfare is going to grow, and so the government is going to be providing benefits for those who are unemployed, those that need help in paying off their house, right? Medical insurance, that kind of stuff, retirement. The government's getting more involved in Great Britain as well. And then we have the Labour Party. The Labour Party is to represent the working classes to promote a greater social equality, and they are actually going to replace the Liberal Party. So remember the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party? Well, the Labour Party is going to be kind of like taking over that because the Liberal Party was back in the 19th century. Now we're in the 20th century. In the 19th century, the Liberal Party is talking more about free trade, and it's not that relevant as much anymore because that was available, right? So it's now between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Last thing about Great Britain we need to know is that there's a loosening of the empire, which means that they have not pursued complete decolonization in their empire, but they're slowly letting go of some of those places. For example, in Egypt, right, they no longer consider it a protectorate, but they are looking to still maintain their access to the Suez Canal because it's really important to their hold in India, which they have not given up until 1947. Also, their dominions in Canada and Australia, they're going to now not look at them as lower, but as equal states. Okay, last slide, here we go. Great Depression, really important. So this is kind of the climax of what makes it terrible. So the economic boom and bust. It was bad in the early 1920s. It got better in the mid to late 1920s, and then right when 1929 happens, it just breaks apart and it just dies. Okay, so long-term reasons, causes, you have the U.S. economy overall is not that strong, even though they make money, right? But they are not strong internationally working with other nations. in helping them. There's going to be unstable banking, and basically still half of all Americans are still living below the poverty line. So the United States is still a very, very strong economic country compared to Europe, because Europe has just fallen off. Okay, so the United States is kind of the new leader, but they're not like the most strongest and unbelievably stable. Okay, also there's a overproduction in agriculture. After war, European farmers can now farm again. If you're in war, you're not going to be farming because something might happen to you. But as they're farming after the war, what happens is that there's a surplus of food. If there's a surplus, extra supply of something, right, that means prices are going to drop, because now, right, there's so much of it, they need to sell it at a lower price before it goes bad. And so that's going to happen, and so farmers are going to get hurt by this. And then you have the stock market crash, the Great Crash of 1929. This is where many people were buying on margin, meaning that they were not buying the stock on full. They were saying, I'll put 10% down, right? I'll buy $100 stock for $10, and the $90 I'm good for. The stock market's going to go up, I'll pay you out of my profits. Well, if the stock market goes down, then what? Then you're screwed. Then you lose money. Then everyone else is taking their money out, and the stock market is going to crash, and that's not good. They are very speculative of how it would do. Eventually, the United States would also recall its loans and investments in Europe, and from that point on, all these investors are withdrawing their money, and that's going to make this whole repayment plan of reparations going to fall apart in Europe. The impact is going to be this kind of a downward spiral, because the international economy, they're tied together and it's a chain reaction. What's going to happen is that production is now going to decline. It's very pessimistic because your government and your economy is dying, right? When we went through our economic crisis back in 2008, even still that we're kind of like barely, keeping our head above water, it was a really sad time and frustrating time towards our government. All right, so decline in production would occur in every country. Russia, not Soviet Union, would not be, because Soviet Union is not looking for international trade. They're focused on themselves. So decline in production would eventually bring a decline in trade, because you don't have things to trade. You're not producing goods. How can you trade them? What happens if you decline in trade, you decline in production, and then that means that you don't need as many workers, so you lay them off, you fire them, so there's mass unemployment. Britain, we talked about how 12% was bad. The worst was 18%. The United States, the worst was 25%. But nothing was worse than Germany. 43% of the people were unemployed. That is unbelievable. 43%. That's basically 1 or 2 people did not have a job. Right? So what are they doing? I don't know, right? And the thing is, they don't have money to buy things, right? So they can't do leisure things. You need money to do that. Okay, and so what happens is that people who are suffering from the Great Depression, they're very discontent, and they often look for someone to blame for their economic woes, for their situation, right? And so who is a perfect target? Those people that we don't really know, those ethnic minorities, right? Those are the people we're going to target, especially the Jews. The Jews are the ones that are in Central and Eastern Europe. Those are the outsiders, those Jewish bankers, right? Those pawners. And so they're the ones that they take the blame. Okay, what ends up happening is that nations are going to react, and they're going to create these nationalistic tariffs. They're going to be very protectionist, meaning that the United States says, you know what? We are going to set up a tariff that is basically going to make everything else from Europe, everything else in the world extremely expensive, but only U.S. goods are going to be nice and cheap so that we can help our own economy. And every other nation is going to react and do the same thing. So now, for sure, international trade is now completely destroyed, and capitalism is now looking at it like it's really weak, and it's going to suffer. Okay, country after country, they're going to put up nationalist tariffs. Okay, and then we have President Roosevelt with his New Deal, and his idea was that if they can reform capitalism by forcing the government to intervene, forcing the government to do something about the economy by spending money. Whether you get the money from a loan, you got to spend money. And how you're going to spend money is that you're going to create public works projects. This is something that's going to be influencing other European countries like France. But if you remember John Maynard Keynes, we have Keynesian economics. This is where even today, right, in our situation where our country is in debt, you still have deficit spending. We spend in debt hoping that it would stimulate the economy. For example, okay, you have President Obama who signed a bill in order to pass for, I don't know, something like $700 billion, okay, almost $1 trillion, so that he can spend this money to stimulate the economy, provide jobs, putting America to work. If you've seen those signs on the highways, that's kind of what it is: public works projects, highways, bridges, all that kind of stuff. Okay, all right. So it actually would improve from FDR's tactics of what he can do. After 1932, what we're going to see is that the economy in Europe is going to get better than it was in the 1920s, and Britain and the United States is eventually going to come out of this depression because of World War II. By building their war machine, they're going to be successful in bringing back their country. Okay, all right.